Now, before we, I've got so many things we could talk on, but we could easily segue down a rabbit hole. Before we start to wrap up this episode, talking about workshops and the workshops you deliver for people, Alicia, that might be thinking about, and maybe they've got a concept that they think they could workshop an idea. They've got a niche or a particular expertise that they think they have the confidence to go and do workshops. What would be some advice that you could give based on your own experiences working with libraries? Um, just I guess things people need to be aware of when thinking about embarking on the constructing workshops and I guess pros and cons and just things to be aware of.
Well, depending on how experienced you are, you might want to offer something for free because you're not too confident and you want to get a bit of experience and some runs on the board and also some references so that you can go elsewhere and then possibly feel confident to charge. The ASA does publish recommended rates, which are very helpful because, I went into this not really having a clue what I could charge. Um, and obviously, people that are famous writers can charge a lot more and they can rent rooms and do all of that sort of thing. I'm not really at that level, and I'm quite happy to work with libraries because I really enjoy the patrons that turn up there. But you've got to realise that some libraries have budgets and some don't. So when you give them your pricings, you say, look, uh, depending, I'm willing to customise, but I'm also willing to negotiate on prices because at the end of the day, having some workshops and getting out there and meeting people and getting some experience is worth it to you in the early days. So it's worth earning a little less money to get some experience and have people talk about you and to say, look, I did a workshop here, I did a workshop there. I run surveys at the end of my workshops, so I get feedback and I put that up on my Instagram and other pages, and I use it in my calling cards to libraries saying, listen, I presented at this library, this festival, blah, blah, blah. This is what the patrons are saying. Because at the end of the day, the libraries want their patrons to be happy. I just did a workshop at Sutherland the last weekend. And when we were packing up, all the people were leaving, and the librarians came back in and they said, oh, we could overhear them all talking in the corridor. They all loved it. They had a great time. And the librarians were so pleased.
Mm.
They really get off on presenting something that people like and knowing that they enjoyed themselves and knowing that they're going to come back or talk about it. And that's what it's really about. So you've got to work with the librarians. If they tell you something's going to work or not work, you listen to them because they know. They know their patrons. They know who's going to show up. They probably know a lot of their patrons personally. So if they're telling you, and I say, look, should I do it on an evening? Should I do it on a weekend? When are your patrons most likely to turn up? Have you got mainly retirees? Have you got unemployed people? Have you got stay-at-home parents? Or do you have people that work and would prefer to do something in the evening? Well, the librarians will tell you. So you always go with what they suggest, and if they want you to customise material, then you're probably recommended to do that. I
Mm.
have some libraries who say, look, do you do YA stuff? Do you do stuff with kids? Well, there's another reason to customise your material because if kids are a big market, then that's worth aiming at, isn't it? And the parents love to drop their kids off, or the parents actually sit in, which can be quite stressful. You're thinking, oh my goodness, I hope I don't say anything to upset the parents. But no, you've really got to work with the librarians and do a bit of research. And as I said earlier, rurals and regionals can be quite excited when you approach them because they don't have the same opportunities. The authors don't all get out that far. So, and if the festivals aren't going on or there's not a lot going on, you could be the event that's going on. So, yeah, suss out what's going on in the communities and make those offers. If you're prepared to do a road trip, that can be wonderful because then you can do a string, out, you could do your out west tour. I mean, I do ones down in Victoria every year and I go through Goulburn and Queanbeyan and Canberra on the way and hit a few libraries on the way. And that's really great.
I've got to ask this purely for listeners who would be wanting to ask this question, but you don't have to answer this. What's more lucrative, workshops or books?
I hate to say it. The workshops actually finance everything.
Yeah, I suspected that. I did.
Yeah. Oh, come on, you knew that, Harry. Because listen, you don't charge for author talks. I mean, I suppose some of these really big publishers and big authors might be able to. I certainly can't, and I would feel a bit off doing that, I think, in some ways. But the workshops pay for the petrol. I sell books at the workshops. I sometimes try and convince libraries, especially if it is a road trip, I'll say, look, can I do both?
Yeah.
Like I went to Wagga and I did an author talk on the Friday night, and that provided a bit of extra publicity for the workshop I was doing the very next morning.
Yeah.
So you get a bit of cross-pollination there, which some of the libraries think is very worthwhile. So look, if you've got a book that's selling, or you can sell a few copies, you'll make a little bit of money there, but it's really about the workshop. But look, you guys have got several books under your belt, so you'd know this better than I would. But now I've got my second book. I was absolutely thrilled to start selling both of my books together, people buying both. And I just thought, wow, this is the Uber pay dirt that people talk about, you know. And if you've got 5 or 6 books, you know, someone was saying to me, I think it was Karen Thurrett, she was with Shoreline actually, and she's a very prolific writer. She's got a detective series, and she said, you know, some people come up to her stall and they say, I want to buy all 5. And she's like, are you sure you want to buy all 5? Like, do you want to see if you like it first? No, I know I'm going to like it. I'm going to buy all 5. And I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice when that happens. They go, I'll have the lot.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay.
That's the advantage of writing romance and crime. You've got those dedicated readers who chew through your books and they're prepared to do it. Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect segue to the next point I was going to talk about now, or ask you about, Alicia. I'm now moving into some sort of broader marketing strategies around things that have worked for you. And the very first point we're going to talk about was the more books you publish, the better. And I think it's a nice segue from what we were just talking about. So do you want to take us away in terms of how you know, what do you mean by that? The more books you publish, the better in terms of marketing.
Well, when I got my first book out, I approached Tia Cooper. She writes. She started writing romance. She now writes sort of historical mystery novels. And the reason I approached her is because she lives in Wollombi, which is where I'm from, in the Hunter Valley. And she uses a lot of the local valley history to provide colour and background in her books. Anyway, we met for a coffee, and she said, oh, look, she's only just been able to give up the day job. I think she's got 7+ books now. I mean, it used to be 5 books, but, you know, things change, but 7 now. And she said, when you get to that number of books, your backlist is gold, because every new reader that you find has to go back and then want to read some of your backlist. It keeps your backlist alive, keeps you in print, and means you've got those people buying 3 or 4 or 5 books. So it's an exponential thing if you can keep that momentum going. And for me, I know I was very anxious to get my second book out, because my book is actually my calling card for the workshops. It's your credibility. My first book was getting very old, and I was trying to get a bigger Australian publisher for it, which takes time because you have to go through the agents first. You can't, and then you go to the publishers, because the agents don't want you to grasp their pitch with the publishers. And 6 months to hear from each. So it's a very long process. And then eventually I just thought, oh, this isn't working. I just went to Nine Star Press and they said, yep, we'll have it. So I could have had it out a year ago, but you've got to try, right? And now I've got that fresh book. Now I can say I've got 2 books. I've even got more credibility with the libraries, because they're like, oh, you weren't just a one book wonder. You've come back. You're serious. You are actually a serious writer. So I think the more you do that, the more cred you've got. Plus, I think when you're doing the workshops and you're talking about your experience as a writer, and you bring up examples of your own experience, they love that, because it's real for them. You really went through this. We can believe what you're saying. Here's a real experience. Here's what you really happened for you when you were writing something, and you've got the books piled up behind you ready for sale. So that's your ticket to being believed. So there's that, but the financial side is obviously the royalties and the public lending rights. And that was the other thing T.O. Cooper said to me that was wonderful, because no one else had told me that you have to have 50 copies of your book in libraries around the country before you're eligible for public lending rights. There's a survey done once a year, and if you've got the magic 50 or more, then at June you get this lovely check in the mail. So early on, I knew every library I went to, it's buy my book, asking my readers, ask the library to get the book in. So if you can get 50, you're in.
Or donating books as you go and do library talks, donating a copy of your book to your library.
Well, look, if that's where you've got to go, do it. But I mean, obviously, it's nicer if they buy it. And look, if you've done a workshop or you've done a talk, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that you have it be purchased. And some of the libraries that are branches, they will buy 2 or 3 copies.
Yeah.
I went to Orange Library and I said, listen, I mentioned Orange in my book, and they bought 3 copies. God love them.
Yeah.
And the other thing is to register yourself, if your publisher hasn't done it for you, with the corporate buyers, because sometimes you'll approach libraries and they'll say, look, we've got a bookshop across the road. We can't buy books from them. We have to go through our corporate buyer. And those corporate buyers are big names like Peter Powell, I think, in Queensland, James Bennett, those names. So if you're with them, at least you have a chance. And then you can say to the libraries, hey, I'm registered with those corporate buyers, which also gives you some credibility.
And that was the next.
I did have this one moment where this is very early on, where I was like, who the hell's this Peter Powell? I've just ordered 5 books.
Yeah. I wanted to know who James Bennett was. It's like, can I get to meet this James Bennett?
Anyway, sorry, Jack, go ahead.
No, that was actually the next question I was going to ask you about registering with big corporate buyers, Alicia. So how does an individual author do that? Do you seek them out, go to their websites, and what is the registering process?
Well, when I first did it, I just Googled to find out who they were, and they tend to focus on particular states. So James Bennett is primarily New South Wales. Peter Powell is more Queensland. So I just emailed them, rang them up, and just said, listen, can I email you my press release? Here's all about me. Here's all about my book. Here's my publisher. Please put me on your list. And generally they get back and say, okay, we've put you on the list. In fact, I had a better experience when I had something else published, because Peter Powell just got back to me and said, we've just ordered 17 copies of your book. And I'm like, oh, that's half my 50 almost. So that was extremely exciting. And I said, like, who have you given it to? Because I didn't have an opportunity to go up in Queensland. It was like suddenly my book was in 17 libraries all over rural Queensland. That was just astonishing for me.
Yeah, as I say, I stumbled on Peter Powell. I didn't register with him or anything. It was more the fact that I was doing author talks at 3 libraries, and the libraries ordered them, and the place they order from is Peter Powell. And
Correct.
So they would order them from Peter Powell, and then they look you up and ordered them directly from me. And because I'm self-published, they didn't go through a publisher. They just went straight to my website, ordered them off my website, boom, done. So there's no, I would, from my experience, the key is actually getting the author talks rather than going to the businesses that supply libraries. Because if you get an author talk, the library orders the books from wherever they get them from, whichever business they use. And so the more talks you do, the more, but then that then relies on councils allowing you to be brought in for talks, and that can be a long-winded process as well.
It can be, but look, push or pull, one way or the other. It's something to keep in mind, though, because that minimum 50 is critical, and if you've got people buying them 2s and 3s at a time, you'll get there. But it's if a library says, look, no, you've missed the point, missed the schedule, we're booked out, blah, 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 then you say, okay, that's really bad, but can you please buy my book anyway? So don't waste the contact, don't waste the conversation. Always ask the question, because even if you don't get that talk, and then if your book is in the library, you can approach them later and say, oh, you know, I know my book's in your library. Would you like me to come and talk? Yeah, exactly. So this is where keeping records of your conversations, or at least knowing who you've spoken to. This is the laborious thing that keeps me from writing, is keeping this administrative thing going on. But let me tell you, it does pay off in the long run. When you get those few $100s, or if you're Tia Cooper, maybe you're paying for cases of champagne. I spoke to somebody at a romance conference. I won't name her, but she's got about 75 books. She's been writing many years now. And I said, oh, I don't want to ask you about exact amounts, but, you know, well, I did want to ask exact amounts. I was like, what sort of money are we talking about, you know? And she said, well, put it this way, it's good enough for an overseas trip every year.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hola. So even if you're self-published and you get up to 5 or 7 books and you can keep doing this circuit, that money's going to build up exponentially over time. So it's, you know, royalties, PLR, selling copies, you've got to get all those income streams working for you, and it all turns into a river eventually if you've got enough books.
Yeah, and some things that, you know, so often you go to things as an author, you turn up and you do the grind and you go, oh, that was pointless, because, you know, 5 people turn up or whatever. And just to give you an example of how things can work for you, is that I just turned up to a readers group at a library, and there were 4 people there, the librarian, me, and 2 other people. So it wasn't exactly well populated. And in the end, I was thinking, you know, I told them, I came up clear and I said, look, I'm an author. I thought you might be interested in listening about my book, hearing about my book or whatever. And that librarian then went and put me in, actually, unbeknownst to me, contacted the council and got me on to 3 author talks at the libraries. And it came from her. And so those sort of little things that you're just chipping away at, you don't know that how far it's going to go. It's always worth doing.
Totally. And that's the thing I think that's got to keep you positive through this, because the person that you met might introduce you to someone else who introduces you to somebody else. These things all add up, and it's like when you cross someone, it's like you don't know how that could, you don't know what bridge you've burnt could you know, affect your future. But like you, I went to Orange Library and I had 2 librarians come because they only had 1 booking, and they felt so bad. All the librarians turned up, and they put wine and cheese on for me, and this lady on a Zimmer frame came in, and I thought, oh, God love you all. Thank you for coming. And I sold 6 books, you know. And you know, I thought, my God, if I become a rich, famous author, I will always come back to Orange. You know, Orange has my heart now. And it made me think of, I was watching Michelle Barraclough's podcast with Marcus Zuzak, and he had a similar story of how he went to Margaret River. And everyone was saying to him, oh, Margaret River, they're so wonderful and supportive and friendly. You'll love Margaret River. Anyway, he turned up and he said, nobody came. Nobody. He said, the librarian sat me down and made me read my book to her. And he said, I have never forgotten that woman. And I thought, now, Mr. $10 million man, or whatever he's worth, can you imagine that library in Margaret River saying, we hosted Marcus when nobody came? You know, I just think everybody has that moment. Everybody has that story where they come and nobody turns up. I mean, you know, I'm fighting to get these great events all the time, and when I get them, it's like, then you go through the second round of fear of, but what if nobody comes? And then, but what if they all come and nobody buys my book? So it's there's always the next thing to worry about. So you've just got to let it go and go, whatever happens, happens. It's all worth something. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to have a good time. Just do it, because you just don't know what you're going to get out of it.
One of the things I always find is you always take way too many books to all these events, just in
Yes,
case.
it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it, when you come in with this big
Just
stack?
in case. I always leave them in the boot, and I only bring one or two boxes in because I know I'm not going to sell much. But I've always got extras in the boot.
There's nothing worse than having someone there wanting to buy it and you've run out of stock.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've had similar, I can't agree more. These little events. Every time I've done an event, even if a handful of people have turned up, there's always been a silver lining, or it's been an introduction to something else, or I've got to network with someone, and that was another point we're going to talk about, which we can kind of skim over. The importance of putting yourself out there and networking. All these little things that you do, they add up. Exactly what you said, Alicia. And every time I've done a number of library events, book clubs, sitting out the front of bookstores on the footpath, and people are walking past you, and you might not sell too many books, but there's always one person you meet and you have a conversation with them, and they refer you to someone else. Every single time I've done one of these small events, it's led to another opportunity or rebookings with either that same library or the other libraries within the region, because the libraries operate regionally. They're affiliated with their regional council. So you might get a gig with the other 4 or 5 libraries within that region because the librarians all talk to each other. So, just keep doing it. Just keep chip away doing these little events. Now,
Yeah.
in
And
terms
I'll
of,
tell you something too. You talk about the librarians all talk to each other. They do. And some of them will recommend you to their colleagues in other areas. And the other thing too is that when they're in cross regions, sometimes they change jobs.
yes,
And that can be very handy too.
Yeah.
just mindful of time, and we've pretty well covered off on the things that we intended to talk about in terms of general marketing. But there's one, maybe this might be the point that we might finish up on. In terms of thinking outside the box, we talked about doing road trips and doing library events and all these sort of speaking opportunities and workshops and library talks and author talks, but things like going to other businesses, waiting rooms, retirement villages. Can you talk us through your ideas, Alicia, in terms of how you can think outside the box?
Look, I they say think local, think community. For me, you wouldn't believe it, but the biggest seller of my first book was the Wollombi General Store, a tiny little shop in the middle of nowhere, very touristy town.
Yeah.
And I just put up a laminated poster saying local author signed copies. And because my book happens to have cowboy hats, well, sorry, not cowboy hats, but farmers' hats on the front, that was quite a focal point. And over time, the Wollombi General Store sold 60 copies of my book. Now, they're pretty pleased because they're making money. I'm selling copies. I don't know who bought them. And in a place like Wollombi, which has a lot of film producers, rather wealthy people on holidays, I would sit there and think, I wonder who bought my book. You just don't know. And that's quite exciting, right? So my local general store, and there's a cafe in Cessnock. They run book clubs and things, and she supports indie authors. I've got some books there. I do a book club there. Now, I offer book club things on my website. People that have book clubs, you say to them things like, you read my book, I'll give you signed copies. I've got some free bookmarks, but I'll coordinate that I can do a Zoom appearance for your book club, or if it's near me, I can actually come to your book club and actually meet everybody. Now, if you're the coordinator of that book club, that's quite a coup for someone to say, hey, I'm getting the author to come and talk to us. So they're fun things to offer. And some of these book clubs are quite big. I've got a friend who runs Probus. It's one of these like Rotary club things.
I think we've both done Probus talks.
Yeah, well, I haven't, but and I said, so how many people turn up at your book club? And I was thinking she was going to say, 10. She goes, about 70. And I'm like, oh, really? Can you get me in?
I went to one that was at least 150 people there. So they didn't all buy a book, but they still, it gives you the experience of talking to a big crowd.
Yeah. And the other one that I recently had, my mother's in a 55 plus retirement place. And, she's been telling everyone how proud of her daughter she is, blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, as a favour to mum, I'll I'll come and do a talk and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't expect very much, and I set up as I usually do, and they all brought a plate, so I can see that could be a calorific thing after a while if you did a few of these. And I just thought, oh, they probably don't have a lot of money to spend because it's Cessnock and blah, blah, blah. Well, I sold 10 books and they loved it. And I just thought, wow. So a 55 plus retirement village, I mean, some of these people don't do a lot of socializing outside. These places can be quite enclavic, you know, they all do things together. They don't go out anymore. So they expect things to come to them.
So they also have a lot of time to read.
They have a lot of time to read, and their life revolves around entertainment, and most of their expenses are probably covered. So they do have a little bit of spare money to buy a book. And if they've met you and that's the sort of thing they like. And I'm starting to think that could be a market. Just going from village to village to village could actually be quite a lucrative thing to do. I shouldn't be giving this secret away, should I? But I was actually quite thrilled with that. And you have some wonderful conversations with people. I mean, I love that. I don't know if you guys have had it. I mean, I've actually had people emailing me saying, from like, because my first book is about a male love story, I've had a few people, possibly in the closet, I'm not sure, emailing me and saying how much they love the book and saying, well, can you give us a sequel? Can you just give me a hint? What happens to poor David? I want to find out. What happens to David? Does he find love? I'm such a sick romantic. I want to know. And I just think, this is amazing. My character's just living in their heart and they want to know more. How much more rewarding could writing be than that you've touched someone?
I've definitely had great positive experience doing talks at retirement villages, and usually through someone I know. Again, I'm like you, Alicia. My mum, she's 89, God bless her, and she lives in a retirement village, very independent woman, and did the same thing. Talking to the lady that coordinates the social events, I came out and did a talk to all the residents, and probably had maybe 80 people come. I've done a few other retirement villages because my wife's a hairdresser and she has clients who come in, and got me hooked up with the you've got to get into the person that organizes the social events. If you try and approach the retirement village company, you won't make it. Very hard to get through the gate. They have their gatekeepers. But if you can somehow find someone who is the volunteer who coordinates the social activities, that's the person. That's the person that will make it happen. And there's a couple of tips that I would give to people that are thinking about speaking at retirement villages or probus clubs, for example, where you've essentially got retirees. Number one, you might have one of those square readers for credit card purchases. They will buy your books. But if you can round off your book, so if you normally sell your books for say $25 or $29.99, discount them down to say $20. They will turn up with $20 bills in their hand. Maybe it's one $20 bill, and they've got a bit of cash. They're probably, the elderly members of our population are probably the only ones now that carry cash still.
Cash.
So, every time I take my mum shopping once a week, she always gets cash out every week, and she still uses cash. So think about that. Have a price that, they can whip out a $20 bill, and they're more likely to buy books. But what I'm finding is that they're probably less interested in the book, but more interested in the backstory. They want to find out about you, why you wrote the story, and what's the backstory to your book. And for me, two of them I was talking about my crime series. They were very interested in about my policing career and how that inspired my stories. They were less interested in the books themselves, but my personal story as an author. And then the other one, my other book, which is a historical mystery based on a historical train crash, they were very interested in the research that I'd done around a historical factual event and how I tied a fictional narrative around that. So what I'm saying is, when you're going out to do these talks, as much as you want to tell everyone about your book, not many people care. And I'm being brutally honest here. Not many people really care about your book, because there's a gazillion people out there trying to get people to buy my book, I want to tell you about my book. If you've got an interesting backstory, that's what people want to know about. So it's more about telling your story. People will eat it up and they'll be engaged, and that's far more interesting than boring them about your book.
That is so true.
Remember the AIs don't have a backstory.
Well,
So it's the one thing that authors have over AI is that
well,
they're
they
not
will
going to have,
soon, though.
they're
I,
not
I
going to have a
was
backstory. They don't. You can't go and have a chat with them.
I was listening to an AI talk just last night by James Bradley for the ASA medal preparation presentation, and he was talking about AI, and he said they're even doing podcasts now with no real people in them.
That's just
And I
sad.
find that horrific. But it's interesting what you were saying, Jack, about backstories, because you think of all these talent quests and things on television. Everyone can cook, everyone can sing. There's lots of people that can sing and cook to very high levels, but you've got to have the backstory of a broken family, or your rags to riches, or something,
Some
because
adversity, overcoming some adversity.
exactly, you've got to, two heads or whatever. You've got to have that, and that is actually what differentiates you from all the other people that have a great voice or can cook and all the rest of it. So in our case, as you said, writing the book is actually, we don't want to know this, but it's actually not as important. They want to know your backstory. And when I've had some workshop feedback, it's been very educating for me, because I don't want to talk about myself. I want to teach them about writing. I want to talk about writing and classical books and all the rest of it. And I get this feedback saying, we wanted to know more about her. We wanted to know about her writing experience. And I'm thinking, really? You wanted to know about me? That's so nice. But it's not just being nice. They're curious. They want the story. We love stories. And, I think the more interesting you can make your journey, and the journey of writing the book, whether it's your research or the inspiration or some character or anything you can come up with, that is going to help you sell your book. And I think that's something we don't really appreciate as a writer, because as Harry said, we're so focused on the book. Like, seriously, you want to know about me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a really good way to sort of wrap things up now, is to think about, and again, when I've done talks to groups where it's predominantly writers or emerging writers, one key question that they're always interested in, and this is a question we often ask with our guests on the podcast here, is what's your publishing journey? For people that are trying to get a book published in whatever form, they're really interested to find out, okay, if you're doing a talk and yes, I've got a book published, and however my book came to be published, they really want to know that story as well. Did you go through an agent? Did you go through a traditional publisher? Did you independently publish? What were the obstacles that you encountered to finally, what did you learn along the way? What mistakes did you make? These are things that people want to know about. They want to know about you, your journey, your backstory, and how that led you to writing a book, to getting it published, and what were your successes and what were your learnings along the way. Of course, at some point you want to talk about your book as well, and the story and what inspired your ideas, but it's not just about your book. So I think for authors out there, in terms of, and maybe this is a really good way to kind of tie a bow around all the things we talked about in terms of author marketing, think about you as the product. Your brand is
You are the
you.
product.
Yes,
You are the
the
product.
product. Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
It's a scary thought, isn't it?
If you can't get in front of it, basically imagine going to an author talk where the author walks on, stands there, and just puts their books in the front, and that's it. I mean, that's basically all you're doing. Is if the only thing you're going to be talking about is just those books that you've produced, they want to know about you. They want to know how you interact. They want to ask you questions. How did you get there? Why did you write this book? All of that sort of stuff. And you have got to be able to talk. You've got to be able to get out there and actually project and sort of become that sort of person who's going to be able to, show the backstory, show that you're a real person, so that they'll get interested in you. So they want to know, how do you write? What's your book sound like? What does your voice sound like within these books?
Yes.
And yeah, that's something that you've got to get over. I mean, I know we're all people sitting in a little room somewhere typing away and for hours and weeks and however long, but at some point, if you want to sell your books, you're going to have to get out there and face the public.
It's the hard truth, isn't it, Harry? Because I've spoken to writers who still have this antiquated idea that I've written the book, I've given it to the publisher, they put it out there, I've done my job. And it's like, if you think your job's over, you are not going to sell any copies at all.
No.
You know, if you think you're going to be like Thomas Pynchon and put a bag over your head in public and just, or J.D. Salinger, well, you've got to prove yourself first.
Yeah.
You know, and then they wonder why they haven't sold any copies. It's like,
Yeah.
do you realize how many books get churned out to bookshops every month?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
it's absolutely intimidating, and you're trying to compete with them for shelf space. I mean, this is a competitive game. If you're
Yeah.
not up for it, you've just got to have the luck of Croziers to compete.
Yeah.
So there you go. And I think people, I can almost hear people thinking, oh, but I don't have an interesting backstory. Yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
Back yourself.
Everyone
So
does.
again, if your potential readers are interested in you, and this has been my kind of final advice, and it's certainly been a learning for me. If your readers are interested in you, they will be interested in your books. Probably
Yes.
not the other way around. So you're going to entice your readers. You're going to hook your readers. It's a combination of both, you know, an eye-catching book cover and an interesting story. But again, for those of us who are, you know, we're not big-time authors and we're having to, you know, grind our way through this, if you can sell yourself successfully, you will also, as a byproduct, you'll sell your books. Look, time is getting away on us, and we do need to wrap things up. So, Alicia, I'm sure we're going to have to get you back because there's so many other topics we could probably deep dive into. But look, you've been very insightful, and thank you so much for sharing your advice and experience. I'm sure our listeners will have got a lot of value out of our conversation. So, thanks so much, Alicia, for your time.
Thank you, and I learned a few things from you two tonight, so it's been great.
It's been fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. We'll say goodbye for now and stay tuned for our next episode on the Genre Fiction Podcast. All the best. Bye bye.